Imagine this. You go to work every day. You're on time. You pay your taxes. But when night falls, you have to sleep in a small tent or on a bus stop bench. Sounds absurd, doesn't it? Yet this is the reality for thousands of people in a country as wealthy as Germany. It's not because they are lazy. It's not because they refuse to try. But in the midst of bustling cities, they live in temporary shelters, old garages, or even in a three-wheeler during the freezing winter. Homelessness is no longer a story from the margins. It has crept into the lives of those who, seemingly, have it all together. In this video, we'll delve into a side of Germany few people know and find out why are people who still have jobs left with no place to call home. Number 1 economic superpower.
Als ich gehört habe, dass ich aus der Klasse entlassen wurde. Im Wasser platzt aber der ernährt sich von dem Blut. Ich habe süßes Blut.
Mittlerweile habe ich nur noch 3 Stammkunden, mit denen ich generell was mache.
Okay.
And the stark truth, Germany has the largest economy in Europe and ranks 3rd globally in nominal gross domestic product, behind only the United States and China. But at the same time, the nation faces a paradox. Its prosperity doesn't seem to reach everyone. According to a report by the Paritätischer Wohlfahrtsverband Welfare Association, about 13 million people, nearly 1/6 of the population, are currently living below the poverty line in Germany, with the poverty rate rising to 15.5% in 2024. This figure not only highlights a complex social reality, but also raises an urgent question: who is benefiting from the nation's wealth and who is being left behind? First and foremost, this level of poverty affects not only the unemployed, but also many who are still working or receiving pensions.
Weil ich in Kreise gekommen bin, ich bin vor 20 Jahren dort.
Aus meiner Familie rausgenommen wurden, weil ich vergewaltigt wurde von meinem Vater und dadurch auch drogenabhängig geworden bin.
The report shows that 1/5 of those in poverty maintain full-time employment. With their personal incomes stretched thin, they cannot afford rent and basic living expenses. Many poor households spend over 40% of their income just on housing, leaving very little for food, healthcare, and education. This situation is more severe for vulnerable groups such as the elderly, single women, and foreigners. The rate of people over 65 at risk of poverty or social exclusion is as high as 20%. Women make up a large portion of this group due to lower pensions and their traditional roles as family caregivers. However, current Social Security policies are not robust enough to keep up with the real demand. Although Germany is a leading export powerhouse with a world-class automotive and machinery industry, and despite its economy's resilience in both domestic and international markets, the growing number of people in poverty is a clear warning about the injustice in the social resource distribution system. The question is no longer about needing stronger economic growth, but about prioritizing the parallel development of social rights. A civilized country cannot be measured solely by its GDP or export figures. We need to see the human beings behind the numbers, especially those who work diligently, yet still lack a place to call home. Every euro invested wisely in social housing and welfare is a story of renewed hope and dignity. That is the responsibility of a wealthy and progressive society. Number 2, working a lifetime. Retiring onto the streets. I never thought I would have to live like this. That is a sentiment often heard from people you might see at train stations, flea markets, or charity kitchens. Not those who have given up, but those who once contributed greatly to society. In Germany, Europe's largest economy, poverty and homelessness are no longer confined to the image of a drifter under a bridge. Instead, they increasingly bear the face of ordinary people, a retired nurse, a skilled technician, or a single mother who once worked full-time. According to the federal government's 2022 Poverty and Wealth Report, nearly 13 million people in the country live below the poverty line, meaning their income is less than 60% of the median income. Notably, a large portion of them are either employed or receiving a pension. This shows that work and diligence are in many cases no longer enough to guarantee a stable life. The story of Caro, a 73-year-old woman who worked as a cleaner for decades, is a stark example. After her landlord reclaimed the apartment for personal use, a move permitted by law, she couldn't find a new place that she could afford on her meager pension. Unwilling to part with her 2 dogs, she refused to go to a temporary shelter and now lives illegally in an old garage. Every day she walks across the city to ask for food and money, yet she maintains a calm and polite demeanor. "I worked my whole life. I don't deserve to live like this," she shared. Many others fall into similar circumstances after losing a job, a family breakdown, or simply being unable to keep up with the skyrocketing housing prices in major cities like Berlin, Hamburg, or Frankfurt. According to data from the Federal Statistical Office, des Staates, housing and living costs have increased by nearly 30% over the last 10 years, while the average wages for many low-skilled workers have remained almost stagnant. This reality raises a significant question in a wealthy society. Like Germany is working hard, still enough to have a roof over your head and a life of dignity. And if not, who will be the first to be left behind? Number 3. The invisible homeless. Amid the bustling streets of Berlin, Frankfurt, or Hamburg, where bright lights shine and trains run around the clock, there are people living quietly on the fringes of society, completely invisible to the majority of the community. They are homeless, but not in the way people usually imagine. Not all of them sleep on cardboard under an awning. Not all of them sit with a plastic cup in front of them. Many of them have chosen to hide. They live in old vans parked on the roadside, in friends' garages, in abandoned basements, or in cold, empty warehouses. They don't beg in public, they don't talk about their situation, and they try to maintain a normal appearance. With clean clothes and polite speech, they walk past you on the street, and you would never know. Without a residential address, without a rental contract, they still go to work. They still send their children to school, but they have no place to call home. This invisibility is not just a survival strategy, it's a self-defense mechanism. They want to avoid judgmental stares and the false stereotype that homelessness equals failure or a lack of effort. And for many women, anonymity is the only way to stay safe. According to reports from the organizations Diakonie and Beatrice Wohnungslosenhilfe, women make up about 25 to 30% of the total homeless population in Germany, but they rarely appear in official statistics or support systems. This is because they often stay with acquaintances or move between temporary accommodations, avoiding public spaces where the risk of assault, harassment, or discrimination is very high. Some recount how they try to maintain a neat appearance so that no one knows I'm homeless. Because of shame, a sense of failure, and the fear of being excluded from social circles, they suffer in silence rather than speak out. And when a person becomes invisible to the community, they are gradually excluded from the system of opportunities that should be available to all. This silent presence reminds us that poverty and housing instability are not just financial issues. They are also stories of quiet existence in a society that doesn't always see those who need to be seen the most. Number 4. The administrative trap. Lose your address, lose your rights. Poverty in Germany doesn't always manifest as tangled hair or a begging sign at a train station. Sometimes it's hidden behind a neat appearance, clean clothes, and a determined silence. It's a quiet but persistent cycle, trapping people even though they still go to work, pay taxes, and strive every day. Caro, a 73-year-old woman, is one such case. She once had a stable apartment, worked for decades, and was receiving her pension. But after her landlord reclaimed the apartment for personal reasons, she found herself unable to cope with her small pension and the soaring rental prices. She chose to live in an illegal garage with no water and no heating just to keep her 2 dogs, her only remaining family. "I don't want to be seen as homeless. I just want to be treated like a human being," she said. Caro is not alone. Many people in Germany, despite being employed and hardworking, are in a similar situation. Once they lose a legal residential address, nearly all basic administrative rights vanish. Without an address, they cannot apply for an official job, open a bank account, register for health insurance, or receive social benefits. A residential address, something that seems so self-evident, becomes the first, and sometimes final, barrier. With incomes that can't keep up with soaring housing prices, many are forced to live in cars, basements, or temporary structures. Some choose to live in tents in forests, on the outskirts of the city, while others take refuge with friends or acquaintances. They gradually become invisible, not because they want to hide, but because the system offers them no way back. What's more, most people in this situation don't know where to turn, who to contact, or what forms to fill out to ask for help, if help is even available. Meanwhile, the welfare system is fragmented, confusing, and lacks coordination between states. No one seems to be truly in charge. With each rejection, their shame grows, and they withdraw even further. When people lose their homes, they lose more than just shelter. They lose their administrative identity, their right to be helped, and their belief that they deserve to live with dignity. This is the vicious cycle, where one small slip in life can lead to a long, unstoppable fall despite all personal efforts. Number 5. The unwritten rules of begging in Germany. Amid the bustling streets and seemingly prosperous life, there are people who see holding out a hand for a few coins as their only means of survival. For them, it is not a comfortable choice, but the last resort when all other paths have closed. In Berlin, the act of asking for money in public is not prohibited. This is why the city has become a place where many come to make a living by relying on the community's compassion. However, in other cities like Hamburg or Munich, the laws are stricter. Begging in the city center or on public transport can result in fines or an outright ban. This difference forces many to beg strategically, choosing the right time, the right place, and always maintaining a polite attitude to avoid being chased away. It is a silent job with its own set of rules. Some choose bars or restaurants in the evening, when diners are more relaxed and willing to share. Others stand at supermarket exits, where customers who have just finished shopping are more likely to part with a few leftover coins. Many even establish a daily, fixed route, passing by familiar spots, hoping to see the same generous faces from before. However, shame is always the biggest barrier. Facing looks of refusal or even contempt is a burden many find heavier than hunger itself. Some admit they have to take a sip of alcohol to gather the courage to approach a table and quietly ask for help. In that moment, the pain is not about the lack of money, but about having to admit that they are living on the margins of society. On a good day, they earn enough to buy a hot meal or a train ticket. But on other days, after dozens of attempts, all they receive are cold shakes of the head. A failed shift of begging can leave many in a state of despair, but they have to return the next day because there is no other choice. Begging in this context is not synonymous with laziness or giving up. It reflects a harsh reality when the social safety net fails to cover everyone when housing is out of reach. The few coins collected each day are the last resort to sustain life. And above all, it is a reminder that even in the most glamorous cities, there are people who can only cling to the kindness of strangers to keep going. Number 6. The bitter paradox: empty homes. Workers intense. One of the greatest paradoxes of modern society in Germany is this. While hundreds of thousands of people sleep on the streets, there are up to 1.7 million vacant apartments. Many of them are not empty because they are dilapidated or unusable, but because they are being held for real estate speculation. Owners wait for prices to rise or let them fall into disrepair to get a permit to build new, more profitable luxury apartments later. Meanwhile, manual laborers, such as gardeners, cooks, and social service workers, lack a stable home. They go to work every day, contributing to the city's engine, but at night they must return to small makeshift tents, wooden huts provided by the city, or even just a tarp under a bridge. Many call this a double paradox. The labor continues, but the most basic reward of a safe place to live is out of reach. This story not only reflects the injustice in wealth distribution, but also shows that the social housing system has failed to keep up with actual demand. Since the late 1980s, Germany has had about 4 million social housing units. Over time, however, that number has plummeted to just about 1 million. Tens of thousands of apartments leave the affordable housing stock each year to become commercial properties, while the number of newly built units is not enough to compensate. As a result, the market becomes increasingly distorted, and low-income earners have almost no chance of renting a stable home. In this context, the vacant apartments become a painful wound in the eyes of the community. They are the clearest symbol of the imbalance. The homes are there, but not for those who truly need them. The homeless are still crammed into temporary shelters, while empty apartments remain cold throughout the winter. This contradiction has led many sociologists to call it a tragedy of modern times. On one side are hard-working people pushed to the margins because their income cannot keep up with the cost of living. On the other side are solid but empty buildings standing like unfeeling concrete blocks in the heart of the city. Without decisive action to bring these vacant apartments back into social use, through renovation controlling speculation or expanding the social housing fund, the paradox of empty homes, homeless people will persist. And this is not just an economic issue, but also a moral question for society as a whole. In a wealthy country, why must people sleep under bridges while right next to them? Entire buildings remain dark all night. Number 7. Homelessness Spares. No one few can imagine that behind the faces of those who once worked and had stable families lies a life without a roof over their heads. Homelessness in Germany often stems from a sudden crisis, not a choice. A shocking job loss, a breakup, an unpayable debt, or simply a rent increase that outstrips one's income. Any of these can be the starting point for days of wandering. The reality is that the vast majority of homeless people are not involved in addiction or crime, contrary to many social stereotypes. They were once factory workers, gardeners, cooks, social workers, or retirees after decades of labor. When crisis struck, the system should have been a safety net for them to hold on to, but in many places, that net is too thin and full of holes. To apply for a social housing unit, one must submit a full set of documents, an employment contract, a bank account, a residence permit. But how can someone who has lost their home prove where they live? How can someone who has lost their job show a stable income? And so they are eliminated from the game right from the start. The overlapping bureaucracy leads many to gradually accept that they have been left behind, with no chance of returning to a normal life. Despite this, many hold on to their willpower. They work during the day, and at night they set up tents in parks or find a place to sleep at train stations. They stay away from drugs and try to save every penny. But individual effort, no matter how resilient, can hardly overcome the barriers of soaring housing prices and a real estate market increasingly manipulated by profit. The most painful thing for many is not the lack of shelter, but the feeling of being treated as an outsider. Once they lose their residential address, they also lose many basic civil rights. They cannot register. For insurance, have difficulty accessing health care and cannot even apply for official jobs. For just one stumble, they pay the price with their entire social identity. Therefore, homelessness cannot be seen as a lifestyle choice. It is the result of inequality of a system that is not inclusive enough and of a housing market that is failing the vulnerable. These people do not need pity. They need opportunity. A small home, a more accessible process so they can prove that they are still valuable citizens who deserve a place in the community. Number 8. Housing first. The golden key. Germany got faced with the growing problem of homelessness. Many experts assert that this issue is not unsolvable. In fact, the world has successful models, most notably housing first, a policy that helped Finland drastically reduce its homeless population in just over a decade. The core principle of this model is simple, yet groundbreaking: provide long-term housing first, and then address other issues. This means instead of placing homeless individuals in short-term shelters, the government provides them with a real apartment and a stable lease. Once they have a safe roof over their heads, people can begin to focus on the next steps: addiction recovery, finding a job, vocational training, or medical treatment. In Finland, this policy not only brought stability to people's lives, but also saved the state money. It is estimated that for every person who escapes homelessness through Housing First, the government saves about 15,000 euros per year, as it no longer has to pay for a chain of expensive emergency services. In Germany, this idea has been tested in some cities like Cologne and Hamburg. A few lucky individuals have received apartments and a chance to start over. But overall, the number of success stories is far too small, only a few hundred people nationwide. The reason is not the model's feasibility, but two major obstacles: a shortage of social housing and a lack of long-term investment. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of affordable housing units leave the subsidized system each year, making the supply even scarcer. More worryingly, Germany's current approach is still mainly focused on managing homelessness, building more shelters, expanding emergency services, rather than solving it at its root. These temporary solutions might help someone survive a winter night, but they cannot help them reclaim a normal life. Germany has pledged to the European Union to end homelessness by 2030. This is an important goal, but turning it into reality will require more than just declarations. It requires real political will building, enough social housing widely adopting the Housing First model, strictly controlling real estate speculation, and ensuring that administrative procedures are no longer a barrier. The issue is not whether a solution exists, but whether society is willing to put people before profit and the market. Housing First has proven that homelessness can be ended if there is enough will and action. And in a country as wealthy as Germany, allowing thousands of people to continue sleeping on sidewalks while millions of apartments stand empty is a paradox that should not be allowed to continue any longer. They do not need pity. What they need is to be seen as human beings, with value, with dignity, and with the right to live under a roof. A homeless person once said, "I am still a human being, even if I am begging. What I still have is my dignity. Please don't take that away from me." That statement reminds us that behind the hurried glances in the city, There are lives just hoping to be understood. We can start with small things, a non-judgmental look support for social organizations. And the government needs to act more decisively, from curbing real estate speculation to expanding social housing. If you believe these stories need to be shared, please hit the like button and subscribe to the NVL Travel documentary channel to join us on our journey.